The Mississippi Delta is one of the richest wetland communities on planet Earth, fed by a half a continent's worth of nutrients that are coming down the river and then spread out there across these different habitats. The total biomass, just the amount of living organism that is in there in the water, is beyond imagination. You can see that because some of these breeding colonies of birds have thousands and thousands of breeding pairs. That huge community is telling us that the delta itself, the marsh systems out there, are teeming with life.
Louisiana has over 2 million acres of marsh, and that's probably 40% or so of the United States marshes.
It's huge. It's extensive. I mean, this is not along the Atlantic coast in New England where you've got a small little patch of a marsh. These are very extensive areas that you can see for miles.
What looks like just marsh to the untrained eye is actually entirely separate ecosystems that interact and that support a tremendous amount of life.
This is a system that stretches from the southern part of the Mississippi River out through these beautiful cypress forests, through these freshwater marshes, through these brackish marshes, out into the bays, ultimately culminating in the barrier islands and in the rich diversity of life that lives out there at the sea.
It's just a very rich, productive system that supports up to 40% of the nation's waterfowl during the winter and supports 40% or so of the nation's raptors, shorebirds, and waterfowl during migration.
As you go down through the delta, you start from one of the most iconic American habitats that there is, the cypress swamp forests of the South. Wading birds, various species of herons and ibises, love to roost in these trees. Those wading birds will spend the day dispersing out into the surrounding swamps, feeding on fish and frogs and so on, and then coming back together and living overnight in a squawking madhouse on the tops of these trees. Just downstream, so to speak, from the cypress forest, but still in that freshwater environment of the upper delta, you get freshwater marshes. The deeper water areas of the freshwater marshes out there, of course, are enormously important as wintering grounds for North America's duck populations.
Most of the nation's ducks end up down here at some point during their life cycle.
There is a huge community of ardent conservationists who believe in the protection and enhancement of wetland areas, specifically because they supply us recreation and food in the form of hunting. A lot of the big rookeries of wading birds along the Mississippi Delta are right there at that interface between fresh and salt water. When you get farther down into the pure saltwater marshes, these are the places that looks like just nothing but grass, but actually are enormously diverse in terms of their invertebrate fauna, which we use as a rich fishing industry and a shrimping industry, but which those birds, they're going out there and feeding on every one of those different size classes of organisms. Ultimately, all of those are fed by the huge fertility and productivity of the marsh systems that are right there at the interface between the delta and the sea.
The barrier islands during the breeding season are just packed with birds. Tremendous numbers of brown pelicans, black skimmers, many of the terns, royal tern, sandwich tern.
These birds out there in the barrier islands tell us that there is a comparably huge diversity of organic life in those habitats that we can't see for the most part, except just by a hair as it goes down the gullet of a bird. This really is a region of the United States that is unique on the planet in its diversity, in its importance, both to the natural systems out there and to the humans that live in the region.